Welcome to In Search Of. I am your host, Zach Billings, co-founder of Wikimotive, and today's guest is Jason Monahan, marketing director of Newton Motor Group. Jason, thanks for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm pumped to have a conversation.
Me too. Jason and I go a ways back, and one of the reasons that we wanted to have Jason on the podcast today is he has been to the great beyond, the other side of the opaque wall that sometimes separates dealers and vendors. So Jason, give everybody kind of a quick synopsis of your journey from where you are now to the other side of the wall and back.
Okay. Well, way back, I was a graphic designer and an art director. I did that for years. I used to make music videos and things like that, and then kind of backed my way into marketing at a dealership, and was there for a number of years through a couple different dealership groups, and then I decided that I wanted to see what the other side was like. So I went from working with Newton, where I'm back at now. I worked for Paul Daly's agency for a little while. Then I came and worked at Wikimotive for a little while, and then decided that the dealer side was really the place that I felt the most comfortable. It was definitely the place. But this journey has brought me understanding on levels that I don't feel like a lot of other marketing directors have.
Not many people get that degree of perspective, having been able to go, to the other side, to really interface with dealers from the other side. And also, I would imagine some of the exposure you get to the inner workings of other vendors, having been on the vendor space, the vendor side of the space. What's an assumption that you had, or what's a kind of a belief you had before you were in the vendor side of automotive that your experience there maybe reframed?
I think the thing that a lot of dealers think is that vendors are trying to screw you, which is strangely ironic because that's the same thing that everybody thinks going to a dealership. So there's this strange dichotomy that happens in that. But having sat on the other side of that, the crazy part is a lot of times the vendor is trying to help you get out of your own way, and trying to explain the side of there's a misconception from what you're saying to the reality of what is here, and it has nothing to do with me trying to sell you something. It's so that you can understand the data better. And so I've coming back from that and having to explain that on the vendor side, and then talking to vendors trying to explain it. The biggest takeaway in all of that is how ready are your whoever your vendor person is, how ready are they to be able to interact with you and explain things in a way that you can understand it. If you get a green P and you're an experienced marketing guy, there's definitely friction. And so that piece is huge in understanding where you are. It will make or break, regardless of how great the vendor is. It can make or break that immediately.
So has that experience and that perspective made you easier on vendors or harder on vendors?
I know what I want, I think, a bit more now than I did before. And so going into it, I'll give you an example. I don't think Tim Cox would mind this at all. I love Tim. We tried something else, and we had Car Now for a long time, and I stepped back from it, and of course circled back and came back to Car Now again. And when I came back, they were giving me somebody that was super green. She was very sweet, but with Car Now for so long, I knew what I needed to add or to get what we needed. And so I was like, I need somebody else. Not anything against that person. I could just see far enough down the road, knowing how this works, that I knew we needed something else. And so there's a lot of situations like that. And, especially having trained people to be able to present on the vendor side, you know what you want pretty quick, and to get the customer there.
Combination of knowledge about the company and the product, and also personality fit. Maybe an underestimated component of the sort of the vendor dealer synergy that hopefully exists in relationships. So, obviously there's a lot of chat vendors, and you've got experience with CarNow's technology, and then there's also CarNow's people and a variety, a gradient within all of that. There's multiple SEO vendors, SEM vendors. How much of, like, when a dealer's thinking about, there's 5 vendors I might want to take a demo with that do some particular product, how much of success with their chosen vendor is going to come down to the underlying technology? And this is kind of a broad question because obviously it depends on the product or the tech or the service. How much of it's going to come down to that company and their product versus the person you get paired with as the dealer for the relationship?
I think at the beginning, so if I have 5 vendors that I'm looking at, I'm going to walk that road. Um, if it is a hard, I'm very upfront. Let me back up a step. I'm very upfront with vendors when we start looking. I'll say, I just want to be clear, we're not going to make a decision today. So that changes where the conversation goes. Like if you try and hard sell me right now, like you're off the list. I want to understand what you do and how it works, and then there's going to be conversations. Like this is a slow moving ship, and it takes a while to turn. So let's make sure I understand that what you can provide meets the needs that I have. So that's one side of it. Once we get past that initial part, that's when the personality piece comes in. I know this, this was not, discussed beforehand, but something that I know that you guys do when you get new people, a new customer in, is you're trying to match them with somebody that's going to match personalities so that they can connect in a way to make sure that they feel helped. And that was something that I appreciated on the other side of Wiki, because the clients that I handled were clients that understood my quirky personality and knew that I was from New Jersey and could take a little bit of sarcasm from me in a fun way. Like there was things like that. But there's always the customers that are a lot more rigid, and you have to know, okay, can we adjust in these spaces? How can we work together? And that's not to say there's not hard times when personalities match. There's definitely times when things uh, things get a little screwy. Hey, this messed up or this happened, but it gives you common ground to come back to.
So, vendors listening, it sounds like there's definitely something to be said for thinking about how are your people aligned to your dealers on a case-by-case basis, but also I'm hearing you say that there also needs to be a readiness to demand quality, experience, and maybe even a match with a performance manager when you're the dealer working with a vendor. Have you asked for changes of representation outside of the example you gave?
Now it happens more regularly than it did before, but even before it happened, like if I know the product and people that I trust in the industry have said, hey, this is quality, but I don't feel like I'm getting that, I will ask for something else. It's happened with an SEM provider recently, and what ended up happening is they gave me somebody in addition to the person that I had. So now I had 2 people. The other person could speak more of the language that you and I would understand in terms of diving a little bit deeper, while the other person was taking care of, like, hey, this fix needs to happen, this fix needs to happen, this fix needs to happen. And so now I feel, okay, they understand what my needs are, and they have shown and provided that. Like there is a big thing with vendors in general. I think the companies that are bigger, the Cox Automotives that are out there, as much as they can provide some quality things, they have a hard time getting their arms around all of that. When you have a company that you're working with that, hey, this is my team, and these guys understand what my needs are. I don't have to hold their feet to the fire all the time, which I shouldn't have to do as a marketing manager. If we are a team and you're part of the team, I need to know that you're going to fight for me. And so how can we work together to make that happen? Vendors get out the door real quick if I'm constantly having to call you and be like, why is this happening? Why is this happening? Why is this happening? And you start to realize there's a strange thing. I realized this being on the vendor side, to jump to that. When you are a vendor, and for some reason it seems like you'll have one client and it's like, man, they always just seem, why do they always get the problems? Can it not be somebody else? Like these guys always seem to catch the heavy. And and those frustrations build regardless of us trying to fix them on our end. Like, it is not for lack of effort. Sometimes it's Murphy's law. It's that's how it falls sometimes.
Going back to maybe the beginning of a vendor dealer relationship, where do you feel like things frequently get set up maybe wrong? And this doesn't happen universally, but like, where are the ways that the beginning of a vendor partnership can not be set up right? And what can the vendor or the dealer be doing differently at that early stage to be able to set the partnership up for success?
I think a lot of times you step into, okay, I'm going to partner with this vendor, and the vendor's like, here's a list of all the things I need to know. So you spend the time as a dealer. I'm going to fill all this stuff out. I make sure it's accurate. Excuse me. I make sure everything is the way it's supposed to be, and then 2 weeks later, they're asking you the questions that were on that list at the beginning, and it almost feels on the dealer side like, did you read it? Did you understand what my needs are? And I put the stuff out there, especially when it comes to understanding the markets. Um, I think that was a big hard spot for me. Like, being in Nashville, I understood what the market looked like here. Um, and stepping into the vendor side and dealing with some of these other markets that were similar in some ways. Nashville's this really weird market. It seems bigger than it is, but it's not very big. And then, you deal with some dealers maybe in New York City or out on the West Coast, or there's definitely a lot of things to be juggled. And I think vendors need to do their homework on exactly what these markets look like so that you can come in and have an intelligent conversation. Um, that that in my opinion squashes so many issues that come up, because if I know that the vendor has even a broad understanding of what my market looks like, I feel better saying, okay, I want to do this and this because I know that they understand the market. And as much as that is a very broad view, that's definitely a 30,000-foot view. But as a dealer, it gives me confidence in that. When I sat on the vendor side, when I was at Wiki, I made sure that I understood the markets that I was looking at before I got on a call, and sometimes I had to refresh myself. I mean, you're dealing with so many, and some of the small markets seem similar, and you're like, was that here or here? And you just have to do your homework. And so I want to know that vendors are taking notes and remembering the things that we say. You and I, for years, when I was here before and we were using Wikimotive, I could come back and be like, "Do you remember when we talked about this?" And we could pick up from those spaces, and that built a trust that we had, in general. That I could. I mean, I told people this all the time. I would just call Zach. Like, it didn't even have anything to do with SEO. I'd be like, "What do you know about this?" When you have a vendor that you trust to be able to answer those kind of questions, do you know something about this? When mistakes happen, they're not as bad, because you know that they've been fighting for you and helping you on other fronts. And so I think there's a space where the vendor understanding what the dealer's needs are and what their market looks like before stepping into that. you know, Nashville's Music City. How close to Nashville do you want to get? My dealerships are kind of scattered around the outside of Nashville, and so there was definitely those conversations that we had early on saying, hey, where do we step into this space? Is Nashville too big to go after at first? And there was definitely times, this is probably stepping beyond the question, but there was definitely times when you would say, I don't think that's a good idea. And I think that's the other piece that needs to happen from a vendor. A vendor needs to be able to say, I don't think this is right, but the dealer needs to be able to hear that. And that's, you know, there was a group I worked with, a fairly large group, and I feel like they struggled in that space, being able to hear the places that there was struggles, and then they continued to struggle, and then they would complain about struggling in that space. And you're like, I've tried to show you, we're trying to help you. And so that was definitely something coming back to the dealer side that I wanted to have an open mind about. Like, let me make sure I'm hearing what they're saying. I don't want to get defensive. I want to be, they're probably trying to be proactive. How am I meeting them there with that?
The reality behind the scenes can truly be that the vendor has the dealer's absolute best interest at heart, but the feedback might not be what you want to hear or what you expected to hear. One of the things that comes up all the time, and you'll remember this from your time on this side, was you're talking about an SEO strategy, and you get to some focus point that's like minuscule search volume, and the feedback has to be, that's a terrible idea to spend money going after because there's not enough people looking for that thing. But then, of course, where experience on the part of the rep or the performance manager at the vendor, where that comes into play, is knowing how to provide an alternative solution, right? Whether it's either a suggestion for a different area to try and solve that with, or, hey, maybe if we did this strategy instead of this, that's the way that we can tackle that problem. The other thing that I'll add to all of your input there is, I think expectation setting is huge at the outset. It's something I've learned over the years. A vendor can have the best intentions and can do a fantastic job, but very frequently, if there's not level setting on what are we going to measure for an output, what can and cannot this thing accomplish for the dealer, right? Whether it's chat and there needs to be expectations about, what happens off hours, or whether it's SEM and you need to be realistic about, hey, conversions are the measure, not clicks, or whether it's SEO and you're being realistic about time to accomplish results. The vendor needs to make sure that they're providing a clear sense of expectations that everyone gets on the same page at the outset, and then being able to provide clear feedback and maybe even pushback.
Very, very true. I think something that I also realize is, like, I'm sure it's easy for you to have conversations with someone like me that has some knowledge because there's common ground there. But the thing that I realized coming onto the vendor side is not everybody has that knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're dealing with GMs that know very little, or sales managers that know very little about what marketing is and how it's done, and trying to, there's this huge amount of information that you're trying to whittle down to something for them to be able to even remotely understand the beginnings of, in a product that's going to provide great things for them. But how do I take, this boulder and whittle it down to a rock so that they can understand this is our goal for you? Because more times than not, they don't know what their goal is. That was like the biggest realization I came across being on the vendor side, is they know they want to sell more cars, but they don't know how to get there at all. Like, they know, hey, we need more leads, and those leads will lead to sales. But, like, in terms of the marketing, the bigger picture of marketing, hey, these different things feed that beast, and that beast is what's going to get those. I want to get you swings of the bat. That's 100% the goal here. But you have to understand these other pieces need to be in place for that to be even remotely effective for you. And that's a big undertaking. And so take that and hand it to somebody green, and you're like, explain this to somebody that you're likely intimidated by, and help them to understand it, and then step back and watch. Like, there's a lot of coaching that goes into that on the vendor side. And not that dealers should have a little bit of a heart for that, because chances are you're training some green peas yourself to be on the sales floor, and you want them to be able to do a good job. So, like, I'm not saying that there's not going to be mistakes, but know that, like, as a dealer, your reaction to those mistakes is key.
I'm hearing give a little grace.
Yes.
Without necessarily dropping your expectations, but give a little grace.
Right. I'm not saying that, like, we are humans in a business, surrounded by humans. So, like, this is a place where we all have to work together to get you to a place. I think a lot of dealers, their expectation is, I will just give this to them and I don't have to do anything else. And that's not how it works. Like, legs on the ground, somebody on the dealer side needs to own whatever we're providing for them. So if, hey, I'll use a very broad example, but like when it's like trade pending or KBB or something like that, someone in the dealership has to own that. If no one's owning those specific kinds of leads, you're not going to get anywhere with them. You're not going to see success. But if you have somebody that is the champion of this in the store, whatever we're doing is going to help move you forward. And that's true regardless of who the vendor is, whether it's radio or TV or SEO or SEM, somebody in the store, there has to be communication. On the SEO front, like I said, I know what my market looks like. I know specific things about my market. Me giving you that information for you guys to write quality content for us and including those little quips about what makes my market unique is going to help that to go so much further. But if I don't have somebody on the dealer side providing you with that, you're it's not that you can't write something great, but man, it could be so much better.
It has to be a partnership. It has to be a two-way street. Yep.
Yes.
So if, for the general managers who are watching this, maybe in single point stores, not in groups, where maybe they don't have a Jason Monahan who's overseeing their vendor partnerships and accountability and how to, the Newton has the benefit. Your general managers, great GMs, have the benefit of you being able to be the steward of that partnership and the feedback source for your vendors. What would you say to a general manager of a single point store that doesn't necessarily have that in their toolkit? How do they maintain a relationship, and what level of knowledge should they expect themselves to reach to be able to effectively manage that relationship without just blindly trusting or, perhaps not giving enough grace, one or the other?
First, I think the first thing is they have to be willing to learn. So whether it's going to a conference, like Brian puts on great conferences that are educational, and yes, there are vendors there. I've sat at the booth with you many times. Like, you can sit there and the questions that come from different people, like there's no dumb questions. Like, we're here to help. So use your resources. I'm not saying you have to even be at a conference, but know who puts the conferences on and follow their content, because they, whether it's Brian or George or Paul, like these guys have a plethora of knowledge that they are putting out to our industry that really just continue to feed knowledge. And so take in what you can, in terms of like these guys that put great content out there, and then like encourage your team to do the same. So like, the more knowledge you have on the floor, something that we encourage super big in our store is, hey, I want each of you to have your own brand, and I want to help raise that level for you in terms of that brand. And so if I'm looking at, we're having social media videos. So putting it out on social, TikTok, YouTube shorts. We want this out in all places. We're going to help push that out for you, but I need you to shoot the videos to make that happen. And so we'll give ideas, but like there's an ownership that goes beyond just the manager. It doesn't all have to fall on your shoulders. Like, use your team beyond just selling a car. I have service advisors that go in the back and shoot videos for us that are like, hey, this is something unique. We want to shoot a video about this. And they'll go back and ask the tech, tell me what you're doing and how you figured this out. And I know that sounds overwhelming, but it can be a 30-second video on your phone. It doesn't have to be more than that. Like, a starting ground is simple things like that you can build on. And you'll find who your strong salespeople are from doing that. And so you can say, hey, maybe you can handle the trade pending leads, and maybe you can handle some other third party leads, and maybe you can handle helping us come up with a process. You're great at talking to your customers. So like, what makes a great manager is, are they managing people? Are they good with people? So you being able to pull that out in these salespeople that are around you, it's not all on you. It's something that they do a great job of here at Newton. Like, our guys are great. Zach, you've met them multiple times. Mike Castro has a plethora of knowledge and loves to be able to pass that on to other sales managers and other people on his team to be able to say, this is what makes us stronger. And so it's really been, It's something I love about being here on this side of it, is knowing that piece. So like if you are a GM of a single point store or a small store, even in a rural area, it doesn't have to be somewhere big. Like use your team. Like they will come together. I can promise you.
All right. So use your team, delegate, but learn enough to be able to be in the conversation and not, not pass it off all the way.
And I would say, don't be afraid to say back to your vendor, something doesn't seem right about that to me.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean you're accusing them of something. It just means you don't understand. Um, you know, I, 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 I am I love absorbing information, and so I love reading. Simon Sinek is a brilliant guy, and he talks about he would be in these boardrooms with all of these people that are high level executives, and someone's explaining something to them, and he would be the only guy in the room that was like, I don't understand that. Can you break it down a little more? I'm still not understanding it. And eventually, all those big C-level executives were all like, you know what? I don't understand it either. So,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's a matter of, hey, just break it down so that you can understand it. And there's nothing wrong with asking those questions. In reality, to jump to that vendor side, the vendors appreciate that, knowing that you really want to understand what they're trying to show you.
That is a fantastic piece of input. I definitely agree with that. The stakeholders we work with from the vendor side who are willing to ask the dumb question that's almost never a dumb question, right? Like it's like, why are you expected? Why would you be expected to be an expert in SEO or SEM or whatever the subject matter is? You're not. Like, you are a leader of people. You are an expert at selling cars and operating a dealership. You're not expected to know all of this. And so I couldn't agree more that not being shy to be like, I don't understand what you just said, or that's not making sense to me. And, that can also lead to, some knowledge building, right? If it's a solid vendor and a solid rep, they're going to be able to help explain it, bring you into the fold, help you, understand it well enough to be able to then engage in the conversation in the future. And if you don't understand what's being said and the vendor can't explain it in words that help you gain new knowledge to be able to better engage in the conversation, that might be a red flag that you either have a rep that needs to change because they don't get you or they don't get their own product well enough, or that you might be working with a vendor that doesn't actually know what they're doing as a whole. And either way, asking that question and being open to the response, I would say, is an important piece of that. As you said, Jason, not assuming, not automatically going to, that's got to be a hostile question, but truly wanting to know and being open to the response. You'll learn one way or the other. You'll either learn that it's a bad fit or you'll learn more about the product.
There was one of the guys I worked with when I was at Newton. I won't say his name, but he was Ford dealer up in the Northeast, and he was super sharp. But he let you know, these are my expectations, and like, you're going to meet these expectations. And as long as we were on the same page, it didn't always have to be a bright and shiny answer, but it had to be, I want to know the why behind it, and I want to understand what's changed and how can we fix it. If you don't come with that bit of information, you're gonna catch some hell on our call. But
Mm-hmm.
it made me appreciate it. Made me reevaluate how I approach vendors just from working with that one person.
There's nothing wrong with clear expectations, even if they maybe have a little bit of teeth behind them at times, because when you're paying for a product, you also do get to set the expectations and just be realistic about what's going to come on the other end of that. Be open-minded, and I think that makes a lot of sense. So that kind of dovetails nicely into accountability and measurement. How do you address a situation with a vendor where there's a performance concern, where you do understand the subject matter, as you certainly do, and you're like, this isn't a communication problem, this isn't a rep problem, we have a performance problem, and I know enough to know that. Where do you start with that kind of conversation?
Well, I want to approach it if I put the vendor on their heels, or if they come to me with something that puts me on my heels, like we're never going to get anywhere productive. So I try and approach it in a way that's going to say, okay, like I understand there's an issue. I want us to find a solution together. Like that needs to be the place that you start. Um, it's very easy to fly off the handle and be mad. Believe me, I got red hair. I understand what that's like, but you have to be able to approach it in a way that's going to allow both of you to find a solution. If you go at them and you're like, this is terrible, and the screaming and the yelling, all that's going to do, they're not going to be able to come back to you with a solid answer like you're looking for. And so there have definitely been times, this happens with SEM vendors all the time. The SEM vendor we're using right now, I'm happy with, but there was definitely points early on where the way that they were approaching doing it didn't really match up with what I wanted. And that's hard, especially in this OEM driven world where the OEM says you can use these, but even those aren't done in a way that you want. And so you're trying to work them into this is how I want it done, even though some things might fluff their numbers a little bit. Like if I'm buying dealer terms, that's numbers that I'm likely already getting from organic sources. I don't want to just throw traffic back and forth. I know what that looks like. And I know where to look. And so I go to my SEM vendor and say, okay, look, I want to be more strategic about our approach here. I know this is going to be outside of what you're comfortable with or probably what you've even done previously, but I want to approach it like this. I want us to give it 90 days to see if it works or not. If it doesn't, I'll be the first to tell you, hey, we took a shot. It didn't hit. That's okay. We're going to try something else. But one, you want the vendor to feel comfortable enough that you can say to them, I understand this might not work. I want us to do everything we can to make it work, but it may not hit, and that's okay. But we're working together to find a solution. This isn't me just throwing the boulder to you and being like, figure it out. That's again, this is a place where both sides, the dealer's got to own some piece of it too. What's being done on your side? Zach, we had countless conversations with clients, over the time I was there. That was, hey, what are you guys doing to help this? And that was a place that we started a lot of times. Hey, what are we doing to work together to get this solution? Guys, I see what you're seeing here, but there's places on the ground that I need you guys to do some pulling too.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that goes back to that place of, as a dealer, can you hear that? There's definitely a lot of ego in the dealer world, and that's not always taken in the best way. But if and you have that relationship with your vendor, to like tie back to what we talked about before, if you have the right person in that seat that's working with you and knows like, hey, I understand you're frustrated. I'm not happy with it either. What can we do together to figure it out? It's teamwork that makes the dream work. We're going to do this together to make it happen. Um, but when you approach a vendor, I think the biggest thing is, now don't get me wrong. There's been times where I've had vendors that we've had this conversation 5 times. It's not working, and I think we just need to go our separate ways.
Yep.
But I try hard to find the solutions, and if that can't happen, don't be afraid to pull that band-aid off sometimes. 4 or 5, 6 times you're walking through this, it's there, that's a red flag. It for sure is. And don't be afraid to say something. Now, again, are you asking questions? Have you asked them, I don't understand this. Help me understand why this could happen. The why behind it is such a big thing. So, hey, there's been plenty of times where we've put a ton of content out there when I was at Wiki, and we put all this content out there. Let's just say for Silverado. I know that's a touchy word over there, but so much Silverado content that's put out. But let's say, hey, we put all this content out for Silverado, and our Silverado numbers are dropping. Well, there's 1,000 ways we could look at this. How much are you paying for Silverado terms on the paid side? That can 100% affect this. What are you doing with Silverado leads inside your CRM? Are you guys handling those in a different way if they come from a different source?
Yep.
I mean,
Yeah.
there's so many approaches to
I
it.
had a recent case where, funny you say Silverado. That was one of the issues in a recent case that came up, and I was working with one of our partners on trying to figure out, why at the sales end of, I mean that's the goal, right? We're trying to sell more cars. Why are we not seeing that at the end of the day? And we figured out that nothing had changed on their end. Their pricing hadn't changed. Their, the digital campaign performance was strong and the traffic was there, but the leads weren't there in proportion to what seemed like should have been from traffic and rankings, et cetera. And they hadn't made a pricing change. They had the same amount of inventory. Turned out their major competitor had just significantly decreased price. And so it was something not even in their direct line of sight if they don't go to look under that rock. And we ended up being able to identify a very clear inflection point where the competing dealer had dropped price. And that was leading to a situation where customers cross shop, and especially in a smaller market where, as they might just only be realistically in driving range for like 2 stores, maybe 3. And you're darn sure going to be cross shopping all 3 of them in that instance. And if one of them has $2,000 lower price on, same trim, same spec piece of inventory, they're going to get the lead and you're not. And that's not, that can't be an excuse for bad performance, bad campaign performance. Like, just because that's the reality doesn't mean we don't also need to be looking at, whether it's rankings with SEO, whether it's, impression share with paid search, whatever the case might be. But there can be a lot of different reasons in the chain that something isn't lining up to what you expected. So I guess if you could prescribe for the dealer side of the equation, sales aren't hitting what they're supposed to hit this month. Where are we looking? Where are we having that conversation without getting too far in the digital weeds?
If you ask the sales managers, they're going to tell you it's marketing. But I will say, when that happens, the first place I'm going to look is, I want to see the market. What's the market doing? Are we up? Is the market up? Is it down? I'll look at search volumes to kind of see, is that affecting the ebb and flow of this? If I don't see anything there that stands out, I will look at competitors. We've dealt with it a little bit at a couple of our stores. They have the minimal allowable pricing that the dealers can do, and the OEM doesn't always hold them to it.
Mm-hmm.
And so what ends up happening is, just like you were saying, these other stores like drop the bottom out of their prices. And it might not just be on their website. Their website might look normal, but they might go to a third party, and the third party might say, oh, look, that price is ridiculously low. Well, the OEM's not looking there. And so there are these other places, and you start to realize, like you said, it's not necessarily something being done wrong at the store. It's something that's being done in other dealerships that are in your market. And so what do you do to compete? If somebody puts a billboard in your backyard, are you going to go put one in theirs? Like, it's not always the answer. Sometimes
Right.
It's okay. How do we, we can play offense and defense at the same time. So, hey, this is, let's say it was a Silverado that they dropped the prices on in these other places. Okay, how can I be more aggressive with my advertising and things that we offer? We have a free lifetime powertrain warranty. Okay, so let me push that with Silverado, because that's something here. Hey, does it come with some kind of a service contract? Do you offer free car washes? There's other ways outside of just dropping the bottom out of your prices that I can say, okay, this dealership is located here, and this is the message that I want to put in their area. And it doesn't have to be a battle to the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
And so those would be the places that I would look. It's not always an in-house problem. Honestly, probably more times than not, it's something outside of that. There's definitely situations where it happens in-house, but you can usually vet that pretty quick and fix it. The external factors are the ones that take a bit more work. So that digital piece is, you said it yourself. are you shopping as a dealer? Am I mystery shopping my competitors to see what they're doing? Am I watching what they're pricing and where? Because I want to make sure that I'm ahead of them, regardless of what they're pushing out there. And so that's the place that I would go. I mean, hey, what's happening with the market, what's happening with competitors, and then what's happening in the dealership. That's kind of the method I would go. I feel like a lot of people typically look at the dealership first, and when they can't find an answer, they're like, I don't know what the heck's going on. But chances are there's so many other things that can affect. Seasonality is one that happens more times than not. Like even comparing numbers coming out of COVID and stuff and looking
Yeah.
back, it's hard to compare even the way things were before that. So it's an
Yeah.
ever changing world. So just having your hand on the pulse of your market and your competitors is gonna put you so far ahead, because as soon as they make a change, you know about it. Hey, I'm ready to do this. And if they do this, I do this. If they do this, I do this. Having that plan down, like, you know, hey, if they raise their prices, what can we push out there? It does not have, like I said, it does not have to be a race to the bottom. And Zach, I mean, better than most, that's the place that more dealers are going to go. It's just like, we got to keep dropping our prices. I can't. You don't have to.
Either fish in a different pond or come up with different bait to be able to catch that fish. You have to be able to think outside the box, and you have to understand your variables, right? We measure success in automotive in 30-day windows, but reality unfolds over year-long seasonality and macroeconomic. A war pops off across the world, and it actually impacts sales in a way that's going to only be clear in hindsight. And so we have to, A, know those factors and be aware of them, but B, be able to look at, okay, how can we pivot where we're fishing, how we're fishing, to be able to combat either those macro factors, or maybe it's the other dealer in our market dropping price. So what would be three things for dealers watching? What would be three things that they can do in their next conversations with particularly their service vendors, that provide services as opposed to software that just kind of is what it is? What are the three things that dealers should go do to be able to improve the quality of their conversations with their vendor partners?
Well, one, I feel like you should know where you're showing up first organically, because money can go further if SEO and SEM are working together. This was conversations that we had all the time, Zach. That's a big thing. Like, $10,000 can go a lot farther when these two things work together. And so, one, your competitor might be spending 30 grand, but they're eating their own lunch. If you can do it for 10 and say, this is where I'm showing up here. And when you talk to your SEM vendor, I want to hit this space, I want to hit this space, and I want to hit this space with this message. And then on top of that, I'm going to follow that up with some VLA. And now we're plastering this in a way that's going to be effective for us. So know where you rank is number one, like in the areas around where your dealership is. Number two, um, have an open mind. So, like, there may be things that are outside of what you might normally do or might normally think. For the longest time, I thought I would say I would say to my dealers, drive-bys only happen in Oakland. Like, no one just drives by the dealership and comes in and buys a car. And I still think that's true to a point, but I have been proven wrong. We started using Clairvoy, and as much as it's high-level data, we've been able to take that and whittle it down some to see, hey, I can see click trails of what they've done along their journey. And 30% of our traffic at all my stores, at least 30% of my traffic, will shop somewhere, never submit a lead, never call the dealership, and just show up. So have an open mind to what's possible with vendors, because they can provide something that you've thought for a long time and been wrong about. So I think that's a big one for number two. And I would say number three, um, understand how your analytics works and understand that GA4 might not have all the answers. So, there's other tools, whether it's Search Console, Google Trends is even helpful in a broad sense. Like there's so many other tools that are out there that can really help you understand what traffic's doing, both on and off your site, and what customers' expectations are. And so understand what you see in analytics and make sure you're testing that against the other tools that are out there.
Great insight and great conversation. Jason, if people want to reach out to pick your brain about your experience in the great beyond and all of the things that you've learned from it, where can they find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm always up for a good conversation. I work with a gentleman now. His name's Rick, and Rick and I have fun wrestling with people online in terms of, hey, this is what we think about this. So like, I love being able to have in-depth conversations and know that we may not agree, and that's okay. But man, love being able to increase my knowledge, and hopefully I can help you in some way.
Yeah, something we didn't, for everyone watching, something we barely skimmed on here because we're talking so much about the vendor dealer synergies that can exist is Jason is a wealth of knowledge when it comes to creative campaigns. You touched on, getting people involved in social campaigns and everything. So I encourage everyone, go pick Jason's mind on how to approach things from outside the box and at a grassroots level. Wealth of knowledge.
Yeah. Thank you.
Jason, thanks for coming.
Zach, man, it's always good to see you. Thanks so much for having me, man. Looking forward to seeing more of the podcast. I love seeing the interviews that you guys do.
This has been In Search Of, a Real Conversations in Automotive podcast, hosted by Dave Esty and Zach Billings of Wikimotive. In Search Of is a Wicked Media production, with audio-visual engineering by Farrell McElravy, produced by Jason Cook.